Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, quickly, I'd like to start by asking all of our witnesses just a quick yes or no to set the record straight. We can start with Mr. Painter. Do any of you have any reason to doubt the intelligence community's assessment that Russia interfered to influence our 2016 election?
None whatsoever.
No.
Nope.
Thank you. Dr. Solmeyer, the intelligence community reported that the Kremlin interfered to aid Donald Trump and damage Hillary Clinton's candidacy. The Trump administration's CIA director says that the Russians have been doing this in other countries for years and will do so again during our next election. What is Russia's overall goal with this interference? What should the United States do that it is not doing to become more resilient and prepare itself for another round of Putin's election interference?
Thank you. It's an important question, and it's a good baseline way to express first that these Russian activities form a broader part of a strategy that are not limited to cyberspace. They are operating in areas below what we would think of as war, but it's certainly not peace. And they're very active and have no shame in what they are willing to do and the tactics they are willing to employ in these so-called gray zones. I think you can discern sometimes three different motives at times. One is a very straightforward traditional espionage collection in ways to help military and intelligence goals. We've seen that against the United States in many different situations against government networks. Two, the spread of and sometimes also manufacture of disinformation. Here the objective being the creation of chaos and confusion that undermines their opponent's ability to actually discern the truth. Right? And it's not just hacking. It's not just a cyber question. It's the knowing introduction of false and fake information at the right times, at the right place, on the right topics, to make it so that it becomes much more difficult to get to the bottom of what's going on. The example you can easily point to is the shoot down of the aircraft over Ukraine and the disinformation put out there. The third topic I'll just hit briefly is the increasing desire on the part of the Russians to hold targets at risk. Right? And this is about being able to affect and manipulate critical infrastructure targets when tensions get hot. And the example here would be taking out power in the Ukraine for a little while, a couple years ago. We want to make sure that does not happen here, not at all.
Thank you. Mr. Painter, I was disappointed when I heard that the administration downgraded the State Department's Cyber Diplomacy Office. Hopefully, the Cyber Diplomacy Act will elevate this office again. In the meantime, what do you think downgrading this office will mean for American leadership on cybersecurity and other critical issues?
So I very much hope that the trend reverses. I think we'd built up a lot of momentum, and especially when we're in the midst of an executive order on cyber dealing with diplomacy and other issues, and we had established a leadership position in the world. I think even if it was for a temporary period, stepping or seeming to stepping back from the world stage really empowers our adversaries to try to exploit that and work to advance their agenda, and really gives our allies and partners a reason to question whether the U.S. is going to continue to lead and continue to prioritize these issues. So I think that was, just not the right approach. I very much hope that between the Act and other activities that we can elevate this again at the State Department. I think it's a key 21st century issue, and I hope that happens. And if there's time, Congressman, I also would like to address the question that you just asked of Mr. Solmeyer, too, in terms of some of the things we can be doing. I agree we have not done enough to deter this activity. This will, in fact, happen again, as was stated by the Director of National Intelligence in both administrations, including Mike Pompeo recently. There's a number of things I think we can do actively, including having a clear declarative statement that this is something that we will not countenance, that there will be consequences for this activity coming from the administration. I think you could set up, and this is just not my ideas, but talking to a lot of people in the community, including a lot of former government people and present ones, but we could set up a task force that will really deal with protecting our elections, knowing this is going to happen in 2018 and beyond, that would involve dealing with social media and others, a real interagency task force that would be focused on this issue. I think we can enhance our deterrence tools. I think we do a bad job in deterrence, as I said before, across the board. And then finally, I think there's a number of pieces of legislation, both in the Senate and the House side, that can give us greater tools to protect election systems, and there's a lot more that can be done there.
Mr. Painter, I want to ask you one final question. As I mentioned in my statement, the President has refused, in my opinion, to hold Russia accountable for election interference. He's refused to impose sanctions, which clearly was in the legislation that we passed with over 400 votes on the House floor. So he's refused to impose sanctions or intensify efforts to prevent Putin from trying to undermine our next election. What do you think, let me ask you this, what do you think the President should do in response to this attack on our democracy, and what message does our lack of action send?
I outlined some of this just now, but I would say that, in deterrence, the classic parts of deterrence, other than the deterrence by denial, is that you have a credible response and you have a timely response. And consequences are important. When I was a prosecutor, if we didn't prosecute people, they'd be running around doing crimes every day, right? So you need to have consequences for bad actors, both to deter them and as a consequence for their actions. And if we don't take any action, that itself sets a norm of inaction that makes the activity they're doing seem acceptable, and they'll do it again. And I think it's very likely they will. So given all of that, I think we need to really use all the tools in our toolkit, including sanctions, to continue to send a clear message this is unacceptable. This was a very, very big deal. This was trying to undermine our democracy. Whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, this is a huge deal in the U.S. and around the world, and we've got to do everything we can to try to thwart it. And I think if you don't do actions, and to be sure, you can think of how you're strategically going to approach it, but if you don't do actions, that sends a clear message, hey, this is okay, or at least, hey, this is a costless enterprise.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you.